Good day, folks, and welcome to video 5. In this video, we really will start the whole scenario planning exercise in some detail. And this really gives you the various stages that you need to go through in your syndicates, and then, of course, at the end in your individual assignments to really complete your scenario plan. So this is really the start of the more detailed part of the exercise, and it'll really direct you to begin your work on the syndicate scenario planning exercise. So let's get underway. In the video, the business idea, we really talk about two things. We talk about the business idea as well as the focal question. So let's get into it and see what we'll cover. So we'll cover the context of the business idea. In other words, where it really fits into the whole idea of the organization or a business. And we'll talk about how we go about developing it in a bit of detail so that you can actually follow the process quite closely. And then lastly, we'll talk about how you set the focal question, which is really about focusing your environmental scan. Okay, so the business idea. Now, the business idea is really the starting point for strategy. If you haven't actually covered this before, then it's pretty interesting and important to understand that whenever you set strategy, whenever you do any kind of meaningful strategic plan or strategic thinking, you need to be really clear about, the value proposition or the business idea. And I mentioned to you that we sometimes use these two terms interchangeably, value proposition and business idea. But I'd like to explain to you the context now of the business idea. But please understand, this is the starting point of strategy. It's the point at which we really begin all our real serious thinking about strategy and also for scenario planning. So if you pick a starting point in this discussion, let's start with the fact that we need to, at some point in time, create value for our customers. So the creation of value for your customers then creates revenue for your organization. Now, if you're a public sector organization and you don't actually derive the revenue directly from your customers, recognize that you are given a budget allocation by the government. And that government and that revenue or that budget that is given you is really seen as a consequence of the value you create for your customers. So the more value you create for your customers, the greater the revenue, or the more value you create for your customers in the public sector, the greater your budget really becomes, which is really your revenue. Now, your revenue minus your costs of running the enterprise, of running the business, of running the organization will generate a surplus. That's an economic term, the surplus, but you might know it by the term profit as well. But again, the concept in the public sector is that we don't have a profit, but nonetheless, there is a difference between the revenue you derive or the budget you get and the costs you have to undertake to run that enterprise. And the balance between that is your surplus. And by definition, that's the funding that you have to undertake any investments that you might make to either change, improve, increase the size of your organization. So your revenue minus your costs generates a surplus, which is used for investments. These investments then are used to purchase or acquire or rent resources. Now we combine the resources in a particular way based on our understanding of the business and what needs to be done, and we are then able to create assets. So resources in themselves don't actually create value, it's the creation of an asset which then enables us to create value. And those assets, the assets that we create, then really form or enlarge or enhance the organization which is capable of delivering the service. And this kind of circular process is really what organizations and sustainability is really all about. Now, I'm not talking about sustainability in terms of the kind of environmentalist movement. I'm just talking about sustainability in terms of the life of any organization. unless it's able to create value for customers and derive revenue, unless it's able to make more revenue than it costs and make an investment, it can't acquire resources. If it can't create assets, then the organization kind of will slowly wither away and die, because that's the part that ends up delivering the service. Now, when we talk about the business idea, we're talking about that particular element over there. The value that is created for the customer through the delivery of whatever service or product you actually are delivering. So in a sense, it's your ability to create value for the customer, the nature of that value. This is what we mean by the business idea. Okay, now we can look at the business idea in another way. So right at the core, it is the value you add to that client. And some people like Clayton Christensen, who's really done all this amazing work on innovation, talks about the value that's added to a client as being the problem that you help the client solve, or the job to be done for that particular client or customer. So what is the job you're doing for that customer? Or what's the problem you're solving for that customer or client? That is actually what the business idea is. And then at a later stage, you may actually want to consider how that problem to be solved, or job to be done, or business idea is positioned against potential competitors. But for the moment, we're not interested in the positioning against competitors as much as we are on the value you add and how you then solve a problem or do a job for the customer. Now, if you want to find a way to really write that up in a convenient form, and you may want to do that for any other kind of assignments or aspects of your work, or indeed even your studies, we'll get to that. But for the moment, let's just talk about how we actually define the business idea. Now, Derek Abell's kind of model, this 3D model of defining the business idea or defining the business, consists of these three things, as you probably already know. It's the customers and segments who you serve. Now, simply identifying who you serve is not enough to define the business. So you can't say, well, my business is to serve the mines, because you could do any number of things for the mines. And so the second dimension, which is often the most popular way of defining a business, but not always the most useful, is to say, well, what do we actually supply them? So what products or services or technologies do we supply to our customers or customer segments? So that's the what. Now, I mentioned that this is a common way of defining the business, but not a useful one. Why do I say that? Well, often you say, well, I'm in the business of making seals, or I'm in the business of making welding machines, or I'm in the business of making widgets, whatever it might be. The point about that as a business definition or business idea is that it's quite perishable. What do I mean by perishable? I mean that the technology and the product and the service may well change over time as things advance in the marketplace. And so we go to the third dimension, which is why we do this. We do this because we want to create a value proposition for the customer. We want to do a job to be done for the customer, or we want to solve a problem for the customer. That's the why, and that is the business idea. Now, I like to think of the business idea being the least perishable of all those dimensions, because while the customers you serve may change, or the way you serve them, your products may change, your business idea is really the core of what you have as a business. So that's really how we're going to define the business idea. Now, I mentioned that we would share with you a way of really expressing this business idea. And if you're looking for a neat way to write it up for yourself, you would start off by saying for, and then you mention the target segment or the client. So you might say, for the mining segment in whatever country or province or city, who, and then you would state the problem they have. For the mining segment in whatever geographical district, who have a problem supplying power to their equipment underground, which is non-polluting to the air. So that's a statement of the problem or the challenge or the job to be done. Our, and you might mention then, our sealable, maintenance-free, non-corrosive battery, lead acid battery, that's the service or product, will enable the mines to power the underground equipment without polluting the air and giving off emissions. So that's your business idea. Okay, so your business idea is the ability to provide power underground without polluting the air. That's your business idea. And then, although we're not necessarily interested in this next bit for the moment, if you're thinking about competitive advantage, you can then position your business idea. You can say, unlike petrol generated underground equipment, our motive power batteries does such and such. It enables power to be delivered without kind of polluting the air, because we have an incredible storage of power, which is in a sealed container, and it is capable of containing the whole chemical process in a sealed chamber. So whatever it might be, this is a way of positioning the idea. But as I mentioned before, the main thing we're interested in is how do we kind of capture that business idea, the value you add, the problem you solve, or the challenge, the job to be done. Okay, so the first part of your exercise, which you will do in a syndicate, and which is really the starting point of scenario planning, is to think of the particular business unit. Now, in the case of your syndicate, this will be the case study organization you've selected. And I would prefer it to be a business unit rather than the whole organization, only because when we start thinking about the whole organization, we may in fact be looking at several business units, several businesses within the organization. So think of the specific business unit itself and answer the question of what's the job to be done and what value are you adding to the customer? So this is your business idea. Describe the value proposition or the job you're doing or the value you're adding for the customer. So the first part of this exercise is to describe the business idea. Now remember, if you don't get the business idea right, the rest of it becomes less useful. So getting the business unit, the business idea right, sounds like the easiest part of the exercise, but in fact it's not. It's one of the more difficult exercises. So when a consultant says to you, what business are you in? They're not actually just messing with you, they're actually asking a really deep question, because they're asking you to place yourself in the shoes of your customer. Because we don't want to talk about what we actually do. That's our stuff. We want to talk about the value we create. So you don't want to talk about the fact that you sell and manufacture and sell electric drills. You want to talk about the fact that the value you add or the job you do is you enable customers to create holes in their walls. Okay, so it's got to be expressed in customer-oriented terms. And the best way to do this is to say, what is the job to be done for our customer, or what value are we adding to the customer? So that's the first part of your exercise. The second part of your exercise in this first stage of scenario planning, which is really step 2, but we generally do step 1 and step 2 simultaneously, is the focal question. Now, I mentioned to you before that the focal question is really about helping you to focus your environmental scan. And often the problem with techniques like SWOT analysis, they look at opportunities and threats, and they have vague things like globalization or climate change or technology change. And while these things may be real, the question you really got to ask yourself is, are they pertinent? Are they relevant? Are they significant to the business idea that you have in mind for the target market that you're serving? And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to now define the environment of your market that your business idea is serving. So setting the focal question has as its primary focus the market that you are trying to address with your business idea. And it also takes into account things like what are the competitors doing, what are the products that are available, who the suppliers are, and what relevant legislation may or may not be affecting the way that that market is served. So, as I said, this question is important because it defines the focus of any environmental scan that you might do in your next stage. So it allows you to focus and get very sharp in understanding what you're looking for in your environmental scan. And in particular, the focal question is interested in the change that might occur in this market for your business idea. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to understand what this market that your business idea is serving will look like and what changes it might undergo into the future. So the focal question is really looking at the future change in your market, which is served by your business idea or your value proposition. And the way you'd express it is like this. When you think about the market into which your business idea is targeted, the question you ask is, what is the future market for underground power in the mining industry? Or how will the market for underground mining, power for underground mining change in the future? So that's the way you will really structure your focal question, because that is now going to enable you to focus your environmental scan. So steps 1 and 2, which is defining your business idea and defining your focal question, are really quite important. And what you need to do now is you need to think about your case study organization, and you need to answer these 2 questions. What's a business idea? And what is the focal question, which is going to allow me to focus my environmental scan for the future of this business idea? Okay, so that's quite a focused exercise, and you will have an opportunity to discuss this in your syndicates. And this will be the first thing that I really check when I review your syndicate exercise on the syndicate assignment on the scenario plan. And indeed, it's something as an individual, when you do your own assignment, you'll need to be very clear about in your own mind as well. Okay, thanks very much. See you next time on the next video.